Hello everybody, my name is Eli, and if you haven't been to my channel before, I'd like to welcome you. If you have been here, I'd like to welcome you back. I haven't done a lot of videos lately because I've been extremely busy with other things. I've got a lot going on right now, both in my professional life and my personal life. So I've been working really hard to come up with some new content and make new videos recently, and hopefully in the next couple months I'll be able to crank out more of these. I am working on setting up a Patreon account, and hopefully I will be able to document more of my projects and help you guys move forward, as well as help me learn, because when I put stuff out there, I do read all of the comments and I do gain from what I'm producing here. So in this video, what we're actually going to do is we're going to create this ring. I'll give you a little close-up. And what this is called, this pattern is actually called a Greek key. You'll see it a lot on Greek pottery and things like that. And this ring is not a typical ring. This ring is actually meant to sit on top of a project, so that when the neck comes up, it's sitting like this versus around the edge like you typically see. Now, I have done this on the edges, and it's the exact same process for both. It's just once you get the blank, it's how you cut the angles and where you cut the angles. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it, and I am making a second video on the exact same thing. But the second video is we're going to be making this, but very small. We're talking like 2-inch diameter, maybe even a 1-inch diameter. And it's a different process, and it can be done without a table saw. It can be completely done by hand. So that video is following this one. The reason I didn't incorporate it into this video, again, is because it's a different process with the same outcome. So without further ado, here we go. Let's make this thing and see if we can help you guys make the same. So when I made these rings here, everybody's question obviously was, how do you do it? So this video is going to basically lay out how I make these rings here, so that hopefully you'll be able to replicate this if you so choose. It's not necessarily a quick process. It takes quite a bit of time depending on how you want to do it. Now, I've made these rings as small as 1/4 of an inch, actually. And this is an offcut from one of the smaller rings that I've done. When I glued this together, this piece was slightly shorter than the rest. So when I cut it off on my bandsaw, that's what I ended up having. Now you can see the difference between these two. On this one, the bottom of the Greek key is actually on the outside of the rim there. On this one, it's the opposite. The bottom of the Greek key is actually on the inside of the rim. And these rings are meant to sit on the top of a vessel instead of around the side, like this one here. Now this one, the ring was slightly over the size of 1/4. You can see it there. And these are actually much easier to make than these. And that's more because of how it lines up after you glue it together, as you can see here versus here. Now we're going to kind of address this because I really don't like the way it has these flat spots. I don't feel like it should have that on an actual ring, and I've kind of worked out the details on how to make that a sweeping arch, and we're going to go over that in this video. So to get right into it, I'm actually making 2 rings at the same time, because the project that I have for these is actually 2 urns. So what I've cut here is, these are pieces of Wenge, and they're 1 inch by 1 inch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to veneer them on 3 sides. And I've cut 4 pieces of veneer here, which is actually not quite enough. I'm going to need another 2 pieces for the ends, but we'll get to that in a minute. So what I'm going to do is, this is just a piece of engineered stone. You can see I have one here. This is actually silestone, I think, and I'm going to use it as my veneer press. So I'm going to take 2 pieces of veneer. I'm going to lay them down. I'm going to put glue on it. I'm going to place my 2 pieces of Wenge on it. Put more glue. Then cover that with veneer. And then I'm going to take my other piece, put it on top, and clamp it. And that is going to give me my veneered pieces. So let me go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and see what it looks like. So I veneered the 1x1 by 24 inch long pieces of Wenge, and I made a video of the piece before I cut it up, but somehow I lost that footage. Anyways, so the parts that are important is, once you've veneered it, I cut it into 1/4 inch wide strips, as you can see, which are veneered on 2 sides. Now I just used Titebond 2 to do the glue up for this, and then I made sure that I was very careful in getting my corners all squared up and everything so that I have a nice joint. Now these are oversized. They're going to end up being about 1/8 of an inch, and right now they're about 1/4 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my table saw up to cut these down to 1/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. So what I've got here is I've got all my pieces laid out. Now these are going to be parts for the rest of the construction. These are the parts that I need to worry about now, and these are the ones that are veneered on 2 sides. So I have this jig here. Well, it's more like a sled, and what I'm doing is I've sprayed all of this down with Super 77. It's a tack spray. I'll show you what the can looks like here in a second. And I sprayed the edge of my my sled here and the face of each of these so that it will actually stick to there. Now you can use double-sided tape. I have found that with double-sided tape, sometimes it will pull the face of the veneer out a little bit, and I've never had that issue with Super 77. And the thing about Super 77 is you can, after you pull this piece off, you can come back with lacquer thinner and it wipes right off of there. So give you a close-up of this sled. So basically I have a piece of 1 inch MDF here. There's 77 sprayed just on the face of this, and then my piece will stick to that, and I'll be able to run it through the table saw. So let's take it over to the table saw and we'll go from there. Okay, so this is the Super 77. This is what the bottle looks like. I use this stuff all the time. Now you can see how my sled just kind of rides against my fence, and it'll allow the blade to cut this thing off so that I'm 1/8 of an inch thick. And this allows me to have repeatable cuts, and every single piece that comes off of that sled is going to be exactly the same width. Now, because I'm filming this by myself and I don't have my tripod with me, I'm not going to try and film this and cut with one hand. That's just too dangerous. I don't feel like losing a finger. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these. I'm going to cut all 12 of them, and then we'll take a look at it. So I've cleaned them all off with the lacquer thinner. I got all the tack spray off. It only took about 10 minutes to clean all of those pieces. Now what I have going on here is these pieces are exactly 1/8 of an inch thick. The pieces with the veneer on them are slightly thicker, and that's just because they have the veneer on them. And the difference in thickness is only the difference of the thickness of the veneer, if that makes sense. So I really can't show that to you on video because this one is only a 42nd of an inch thinner than this one here. That way the center of them stays consistent. So all of the Wenge, including the Wenge you see here, is 1/8 of an inch thick. The only reason this is thicker is because it already has the veneer on it. Now that I've got all my pieces cut to the right size, they're 1/8 of an inch thick, an inch wide, and 24 inches long, I need to start working on gluing up the core of my Greek key, which is this piece here, the very center of it. And in order to do that, I need to decide how far I want my Greek key to come down and up in here. And I've made the decision that I want that section to be 3/8 of an inch. So I have to take 2 of my pieces that have the veneer on two sides, and rip off a piece 3/8 of an inch wide, rip it down to 3/8 of an inch wide, and I'll have a veneer on these two sides. Sorry, the camera's not focusing very well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out what that's actually going to look like. So I'm going to have my one piece that is, I'm going to draw it much larger than what it is actually, so that everybody can kind of see what it is that I'm doing here. So what this is my piece that is 1 inch wide this way, and it's 1/8 of an inch this way, and it has veneer on two sides. So I'm going to rip off a piece of two of them that is only 3/8 of an inch wide, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue that 3/8 of an inch piece here like this. And where I want the veneer for this piece when I glue it on is I'm going to want the veneer to be on this side and on this side, just like that. And what that's going to create is this core of the Greek key. So you're going to have the veneer on the outside, the veneer coming over, the veneer coming down, and then over again. That's this piece here, the veneer coming up, over, down, and over. So that's my next glue up stage. And this piece again is going to be, for me, 3/8 of an inch. Now this section here can be whatever you decide it to be. But for me and for the project that I'm doing, I want it to be 3/8 of an inch. So I'm ready to start gluing these things up, and I already showed you the layout of how I'm going to glue it up, but I need to point out a few things. This is the 3/8 inch strip that I cut, and pressed up against my straight edge here, you can see how much of a cup it has to it. It's pretty bad. And both of them are like that. This one's another one up here, you can see. It's pretty bad. And what causes that, if you're not familiar with veneer work, is when you veneer something with wood glue or any glue, that glue is going to shrink, and it's going to cause the piece that it's glued to cup like this. Especially if you've got two sides veneered like this one on such a small piece, it's going to cause that to bend and warp and do all kinds of weird things. So it's very important to use, that's why I use the Super 77 to hold them in place while I'm cutting them, because it will hold it straight and flat and give you a good cut. But once you pop it off of there, you end up with this warped piece there. So what I have here is my glue up jig, and this is a perfect 90 here. This gauge right here is absolutely perfect. So it's really nice and tight, and I've used this jig for a while. These two pieces are glued together. This is actually engineered stone. It's sile stone. I use this a lot because it's flat, it's stiff, and I don't need to put any wax paper or anything when I'm gluing down. The wood glue is not going to stick to this. It might be a little hard to pop off once the glue is dry, but it's actually not going to stick to the piece, so I can reuse it and reuse it and reuse it. That's why I like using this stuff for most of my jigs and things like that. So what I'm going to do is, this is one of my veneered pieces, and I showed you the layout of how I'm going to glue it up. So this piece is going to go here, right? And then this piece is actually going to glue onto it just like this. But it has to be flat up against there. So what I've got to do is make sure that this one is stuck down nice and tight. So I'm probably going to spray Super 77 on this and on the face of that piece of wood, and then stick it down. It's not going to go anywhere. And then for this, what I'm going to have to do is clamp a piece in and down to keep it there. It is very important at this stage to make sure that everything you glue up is perfectly square. When you get down to this scale of things where you're talking about like 3/8 by a 1/4 inch square and whatever, if you're out of square even a little bit, it's going to show up like a sore thumb on your finished product. So it is very important to keep everything square at this stage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up to glue, and then we're going to take a look at it. So this is what it looks like glued up. I'm going to come around here to the edge so we can get a good look at it. Okay. So this bottom piece and this piece that you see right under here are what's being glued together. This piece here is putting pressure inward with the squeeze clamps and holding it in place. That kind of gets that bow out of it. These two pieces are two of the 1/8 inch pieces of Wenge. So you put them together, you've got a 1/4 inch here, and then I've got the downward pressure with these clamps. So in a few hours, I'll take this out of the clamp and we'll take a look at it and see where we're at. So I was able to get a little more of the glue up done. This is a rougher piece right here. This one hasn't been cleaned up quite yet. This one has been somewhat cleaned up. And what you're looking at here, if you're just looking at the maple line where it comes across, up, over, and then down, is this portion of the Greek key here, where it, let me get a little closer, where it comes across, up, over, and then down. This piece is in reverse of that piece, but it doesn't really matter, it's the same thing. This piece up here that you see on the top is this portion right here. Now, the next step in what I have to do is I have to veneer this side, because if I don't veneer this side first, then when I glue, I could actually, if I wanted to, come in here, sorry, kind of jumbled up. So I could glue this piece in, which is actually one of the upcoming steps, and it would sit right here. But it is better to glue this veneer on first and then sand it in here and get a nice crisp edge versus trying to butt that veneer to this piece after this piece is glued on, if that makes sense. So the next step that I'm actually going to do is glue a piece on here, glue my veneer on here and clean it up, and then glue a piece of veneer on here and clean it up. Then my next step after the veneer is done, my next step after the veneer is done on this portion and this portion is I'm going to glue a piece of Wenge in here coming down, and I'm going to glue a piece of Wenge here coming across. And we'll get to that in just a minute. So how I glued this piece on was I just stood my, I took a piece of my 1/8 inch Wenge and I laid it flat. And then I stood this piece on end, as you can see here, and I put squeeze clamps. It's really hard, but anyways, I put squeeze clamps from here to here, holding it down tight. And you want to make sure that you are square, perfectly square inside of here, okay? And you want to make sure that you stay square here. You want to be really careful to stay square with everything as you go. Now, what you see here in the background is actually a sanding block. And this thing is about, I don't know, those are just 12-inch sections from here to here, here to here, so I'm probably at 30 inches roughly. And what I'm doing with that is when you glue it together, you're gonna try and get it as close as possible. But you can see I'm just a little bit proud there. So what I do is I come in and I use my sanding block and I just move across, and I very carefully take that off until it's flush like this one. This one has been cleaned up. And I'm constantly checking it with a square to make sure it stays square. And it's very important to keep your joints very tight at this, every stage of this thing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and clean this block up. I'm gonna glue the veneer on, and then we'll take a look at it. So right now I'm gluing the veneer onto that face piece, and this is what it looks like. If I pull this kind of back and give you a look at the end here. This piece that you see here that my thumb is touching, the only purpose for it is so that my clamp doesn't mar the wood underneath of it. And you can see the veneer on the very bottom. And it's very important to make sure that these things are clamped square, which I did check. I'm gluing this on the back of this is actually my sanding block that I showed you earlier. And I'm just gluing them on with the back of the sanding block. It gives me a nice flat edge there. And this will take about an hour in the clamps, and then I'll remove it and see where we're at. All right, so this piece right here has been veneered and cleaned up. Well, they've both been veneered, but this one's actually been cleaned up at this point. So you can see, flip it around here. So you can actually see the veneer line wrapping around the Wenge there. Pretty obvious there. This is what it looks like before it's been all trimmed up. You can see that there's a veneer overhanging this side here. So basically what I did was I very carefully trimmed it back so it's kind of close to where I want it to be. And then I have my 30-inch long sanding block here. And if you stand that up on end, you've got your sandpaper here, and you've got a flat surface here with no sandpaper. So you can take the piece that is got the veneer overhanging just like that, right? And if you set it on top of your sanding block, just like that, you can easily just move back and forth until you have sanded that lip down so it is flush with the rest of it. And it should look something like this. Now that veneer line that you see there, you can see it right at the tip of my finger, should be nearly invisible at this point. That's going to give you nice tight joints and a clean look in the end. So now that all my pieces are cleaned up, it's time to veneer the top portion here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my veneer and glue that down. So we're moving along on the glue up process here. I've got a side-by-side comparison. The one here on the right does not have this piece glued in yet, because the next step is obviously to glue this piece in. Now these pieces are way longer than what they need to be. So is this piece, and that's all going to get cut off later. The reason I like them a little bit wider like this is they're easier to work with. It's much harder to work with like a little 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch by 24 inch long piece. So yes, there's a little bit of waste in doing it this way, but it's important to do that. Now, my next step after I glue this piece on, we'll get to that in a minute, is I have to take it over to the table saw. Let me try and get this thing to focus. I'm going to take it over to the table saw. I'm going to cut it off here, because my next step is actually to veneer this side of the piece. So after I glue this one up, we'll tune in and talk about the next step here. So at this point I have trimmed off the excess here. If you remember, it was sticking out kind of like an L shape almost. And the next step is, now that it's trimmed off and sanded smooth, and if you take a real close look, the joint is very tight, which is what you really want to focus on, is having very tight joints. But now the next step is to veneer this side of both pieces. So I've already got the veneer cut. I'm just going to go ahead and glue and press that on there, and then we'll move to the next step. So as you can see, I have veneered the outside layer already, and now it's time to move on to the next glue up, which is, if I can hold my pieces straight here, which is I need to take another 1/8 inch piece of Wenge and glue it in here just like this, making sure that I am square with the face here. And I'm going to go ahead and do that glue up, and then we'll take a look at it. So at this stage, you can see I have glued the two outer pieces on. And my next step, I've done that to both of them, as you can see. So my next step is I'm going to take it to the table saw and I'm going to trim up this side and this side and maybe get this a little bit closer on the table saw, and then I'm going to finish this off with my sanding block, because that veneer obviously is very thin and it's a very delicate process to get this square and smooth. So I'm going to head over to the table saw and clean this up, and then we'll take a look at it. So let's take a quick look at what's going on here. So I have glued up the surrounding pieces, this piece, and the top portion here. Now let's take a closer look at this, because when I had originally started doing this, I was not planning on doing this piece here. This white piece of veneer down here. I was not gonna do this piece. I was gonna leave that completely off. And the reason why is I was gonna glue it together, and then I was gonna turn it round, and then I was gonna add the veneer so that it was a sweeping arc going all the way around. And the reason I kind of backed off on that idea for this project is just the amount of time, because you would need a piece of veneer here, and then a little black piece and a white piece and a black piece. And doing that would take an enormous amount of time. So for this project, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to go that route. But what I am gonna do is the angle is gonna come down this way, and it's gonna meet right at this point, somewhere around here, and then it's going to come down here. So the flat portion is going to be minimal, and we'll get to that when we get to the part where we're cutting it up. But the reason why I'm talking about this now is now I have to come back, because I've kind of switched up my game plan, and I have to put a piece of maple veneer all the way over to where it comes in contact with this piece. And what that means is I'm gonna have to router out very carefully this chunk of wood right down to the veneer in order to butt it, because if I cut it off, then I need to do a piece of veneer up to here, then I need to do a little piece of black veneer, then I need to do a little piece of white veneer, and then I need to do a piece of black veneer. So to avoid all of that, I'm gonna go ahead and use a router bit and take care of this, which I'll kind of show that setup and everything. But this, I don't really want to call it a mistake, because it's going according to the original plan. It's just that I changed the plan up after the fact. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We'll come back and take a look at this tomorrow after that piece is dried up, and I can kind of make some cuts and stuff like that. So as you can see, I kind of came in here with the router and cut this down so that just my veneer, you can see it at the very tip of my thumb, is exposed, because my next glue up is I need to take these thin pieces and veneer one side of them, and then that side is going to get glued into the groove like this. I can do this with one hand. And then that should allow that bottom line to come out towards my thumb. And that's what will create the continuous ring when I finally go to glue the ring up. Now this is my last glue up before I cut the angles and create my rings. So I've glued the last piece in. My next step is to trim that excess off and cut my angle, and I haven't decided on what my angle is going to be yet. I'm going to go ahead and figure that out real quick, and then go ahead and cut it. Okay, so I've pretty much got them trimmed up. I didn't cut the excess off of this lip here because I'm about to cut the angles to create my ring. I made the decision that I want to do 24 segments. So in order to figure your angle, you're going to do 360 degrees. Divided by 24 is going to be what, 15, and then you're going to divide that in half. Is going to be 7.5 degrees is going to be your angle coming up on each side. Now it's going to be, what I'm going to have to do here is mark this veneer line across, because my angle is going to need to intersect right at that point. After I cut the angle, I'll be able to explain that a little bit further. So at this point I have made all my necessary cuts, and it's now time to start cutting it into the segmented pieces. In order to do that, I have made the decision to put this skill saw blade on my chop saw. The reason why is the skill saw blade is only a 1/16 of an inch wide, whereas a regular 10-inch blade is going to be an 1/8 of an inch wide. So every little bit that you're removing with your cut is just less material you have to work with. So if your blade is an 1/8 of an inch thick, every 8 cuts you're going to lose a 1-inch piece. In this case, I'm doing 1/2 inch wide pieces. Now I've already cut up the other one and glued it into the ring, and this is the ring. I decided to go with 30 pieces instead of 25, just to make the ring slightly larger. It fits the piece better. And I glued this together with epoxy and rubber bands. The reason why I used epoxy for the glue up is because I have more time to work with it. If I do wood glue, yes, I can make some fine adjustments, but when you're trying to glue 30 pieces, you need a little more time to make sure all of your corners line up precisely. So I used a 30-minute epoxy, which gave me about 20 minutes of work time, and I very slowly went around and made these adjustments one at a time. And the more the glue set up, the more I was able to get the pieces slightly closer, because they were kind of bonding to each other as I went. So when I go to glue this up, I'll maybe make another short video and then show you what this looks like sanded. So let's go ahead and chop this up into the 30 pieces that I need, and then I'll glue it up. Oh, and as you can see here, I've set up, this is just a 90-degree piece of MDF with a stop here. So every single piece is going to be cut exactly to the right size. Now the reason that I did this is because if I push this up against my MDF stop and I push it tight like that, having the blade go down between the MDF is going to reduce the amount of splintering. Now on some woods it doesn't matter, but with Wenge, if you know anything about it, it splinters really bad. So that's why this makes sense for cutting this particular piece up. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this up, and then we'll take a look at it before I glue it. So the first ring has been glued up and sanded, and you can see that we actually got really good results. You can see a couple areas like this one here where that piece of veneer sticks down a little further than the other. When I go to turn this, there are some really simple methods to fix that, and I think there's a few of them. I think there's 4 or 5 of them total, but for the most part they all line up, and we'll kind of, it'll be a while before I actually turn this ring, so we may not get to that in this video. But at this point you can kind of count how many pieces of wood you have in your segment. So if counting each individual piece, you've got one here. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So each segment is 17 pieces. In this case, I've got 30 that make up the ring. So that would make it, what, 510 pieces for this ring. Now, I am going to do a few things, like I'm going to chuck it into my lathe, and I'm going to cut it back here. And I'm going to put another white line there. I'm going to cut it down here so it's an even space from here to here as it is from here to here. And I'm going to put a white veneer around the outside too. So you're looking at 512 pieces for this individual ring here. So I cut up my other pieces, and when I glue them up, what I like to do is I like to kind of do a dry fit. I will set them all down and just make sure that I don't have any issues with any of the pieces, and I always make sure that I've got extra in case one of the pieces is off. I can just replace it, but it's always good to inspect and kind of do a dry fit to make sure that everything is perfect before you start putting glue on it. So because I'm filming with one hand and working with the other, I'm not going to film the glue up process. Most of you know what that's all about anyways, so I'm going to go ahead and get to it. If there are any questions about the process, about how that ring was made, feel free to ask in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer your questions. I'm pretty good about responding. I read all of the messages that are put down there, so keep an eye out for the next video. It should be coming very shortly after this one. I'm talking within weeks. I'm working on it right now as we speak. I'm about, I don't know, about halfway through with it. And again, we're gonna be making the same ring, just much smaller and with a different process. So look forward to seeing you again soon. And thank you for watching my video. If you like what you saw, feel free to like and subscribe to my videos. Thank you.